we'll get this show on the road. And I'm going to ask Ruth Ann to introduce Barbara Jaquay. Jaquay, got it. So Ruth Ann's going to do that for us, okay? Ruth Ann?
Oh, sure. She can tell you more about herself than I can, but I'll tell you the story about how I found her. I grew up in Casa Grande, and I still have some friends in Casa Grande. And I've gone down there, and my friends' children, grandchildren are involved in the rodeo activity stuff out there. So a few times I've gone to these rodeo activities, and I was introduced to these people, and by the name of Alza. So then somewhere along the line, we were asking different people, who could we get to talk about sheep? We're down at Black Canyon City. We asked this gentleman down there if he knows anybody that knows anything about the sheep herding that went on. He said, I don't know. He said, but I think there's a family in Casa Grande named Alza. I think I know that name. So I contact my friend. She gives me the Alza's name, and then Carmen Alza gave me Barbara's name. So it's sort of a conflict. So you never know what the connections are. Right. So anyway, welcome, Barbara, and you can tell us all about yourself and why the heck you got started researching sheep.
I will. I want to say, first of all, thank you for having me. And I am not a sheep herder. I don't own any sheep. I've never been around sheep as I was growing up. My grandfather was a dairy farmer back in Ohio. And I know that sometime in the early 60s, maybe 70s, he and my grandmother went out to visit somebody in the family, someplace in maybe Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, we don't know where. And they found that family name being sheep herders. They were related, and that's as far as I know. So I am related, but I've never done anything with sheep. Until I'm a speaker for the Arizona Humanities, and as a speaker for the Arizona Humanities, about every 2 or 3 years, they would like you to come up with a new topic. And I'm sitting having coffee, oh gosh, what am I going to come up with? I couldn't think of anything. And so what happened, I said something to my friend. I said, any ideas? She says, nobody's done anything on sheep. I go, sheep? What about sheep? She said, well, there used to be a lot of sheep. She said, I remember they would go down the road in Buckeye from field to field. I go, okay, good. So I went to the library and I looked and I found out that 1936 was the last thing really written about sheep. And that was by a gentleman, he put it in the Journal of Arizona History. And so I thought, okay. And I do know that we have some sheep families out in the Buckeye area that are no longer in the sheep business. And so I contacted Irene Aha, which this lady right back here knows. And what happened was Irene said, oh, I'm so glad somebody is going to write the history of sheep. I go, whoa, wait. I need to talk about sheep. So she said, well, come back in a week. And I go, oh, okay. So I thought, well, that's the end of that story. So I'm going to have to come up with something else. So she called me. She said, why don't you come back over? And she gives me a notebook about this thick with people's names and phone numbers and addresses. And she said, here's all the people I can remember. I think there was 96 names that she wrote down that were in the sheep business. She said, you'll have to contact kids because the parents aren't alive anymore. And she said, so, you know, you can do your presentation, but, you know, I really like somebody to write the history of the sheep. I have 7 kids, but none of them are interested in writing the sheep history. And I thought, well, that's sort of up my alley. I wrote one on cotton, why not on wool? You know, there's a connection there, right? There are fibers. So I thought, okay, and the more I looked into it, and the more I realized that there wasn't a lot, and that the industry is disappearing in our state. At one point, at the height of the industry, there was 1.5 million sheep in Arizona. Now, we are not one of the top sheep herding states in the country. That would be Texas or Montana. They compete against each other. California. And there's a difference between sheep herding in the western states versus the eastern states. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as I go through. So I'm looking at the sheep industry here in Arizona through this presentation, and there was a wealth of information out there. But the funnest part was the interview with families. And I do have my book with me. I interviewed everybody that would let me interview them. And as I was telling someone, I did not use a tape recorder. They did not want it on tape, which is unfortunate because you don't have that record of it. You know, you don't have it down the road. But what I did is my husband and I would go and I would take lots of notes, and then we would talk about it when I got home, and I would write it up and I sent it back to each of the families to approve it. They told me some things that they wanted me to know, but they didn't want in the book. And I understand that, you know, just cute little stories that now they said, okay, you can go ahead and put it out. You can tell them, oh, and in your presentations we don't care anymore. And that was really neat to be able to do it that way. So I have my own on the whole thing, but it's not going to be in the library or anything. Some of the families have given interviews. Some of them still are very reluctant. And after the book came out, all those families that said, no, I have not anything to do with this, forget it now, are all coming out of the woodwork and saying, please come see me. And so I don't know when they end this research is ever going to end. But right for me, I love to do research. I'm one of those geeks that like to spend lots of time in the library. I worked in the library going through school. That's how I paid for my college. So I guess it's just natural, you know, books, research, what can I say? So with that, let me get started on the presentation. I have a couple things to show you as we go through. This is Bass Aha, as he is taking his sheep through the Buckeye area, because they would take them from field to field. They can only be on the fields for so long. They would eat the alfalfa in the wintertime, and I'll come back to that point here in a minute. But I do want to point out that during World War II, Woodrow Wilson decided to help out not having World War I. Thank you. He pointed out that we didn't need to spend the money buying gas to mow the lawn at the White House, so let it have sheep. There's two stories. If you go to the Library of Congress, you get one story, and if you go to the White House website, you get another story about the sheep. There was supposed to be 98 pounds of wool that came off of the sheep. They gave $58,000 that went to the Red Cross during the war to help out, and then there was another story that said it was $98,000, which is a lot of money no matter what for that small amount of wool, because you don't get that with wool. And then the sheep were supposedly came someplace other than George Washington Estate. He had sheep when he was the President of the United States. And this is not the first time the sheep was on the lawn of the White House. When Jefferson was president, he had lots of sheep. Remember during World War, or the American Revolution, the French helped us. And Lafayette said, you guys need to grow sheep here, raise sheep in the United States. This is a perfect place for it. And Jefferson went gung-ho. And he had lots and lots of sheep. And what he wanted to do was study them. And he said, well, how can I do that if I'm president? I can't go home. So he brought them and had them on the lawn at the White House. He had to finally take them off. One of the rams got a little rambunctious. The kids would cut across and they killed one of the kids. So they had to take him and take it back to his estate. But he did a lot on the sheep. Our state name may come from the Basque, and the Basque are the families still doing the sheep raising here in Arizona in large numbers, where they try to follow the pattern of 110 years ago of what they were doing, and we'll come back to that also. The thing is that, remember, when we became a state in 1912, this did not include the area that was Arizonac, okay? That would still be down in Mexico, but they believed that there was Basque sheep herders. Basque came over to the United States very, very early. They came with Anza. They came with Christopher Columbus on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. So they have been here. In fact, they may be the people that came before Columbus into Canada, because they were whalers. And so that's another thing that's being looked into. So that maybe from that, Marshall Trimble knows in the 1800s around the Nogales area there were the sheep. And it is a Pima Indian word, and Arizonac was actually a Pima village. But we do not know, because they can't tell you the history of that word themselves. So that's another idea. We do know that there was lots of sheep here early on, because of Father Kino. But the first sheep that were brought into Arizona actually came from the Navajos pilfering from New Mexico, from the Pueblos. And these were the churro sheep, and I'll show you a picture of one of those. We know in 1629 the missionaries gave them to the Hopi, so that area was the first start. But in the late 1690s, early 1700s, Father Kino brought in domesticated sheep that he taught the natives how to make sure that they would have the wool, they would have meat, and that they would have more sheep. And we do know that in April 24th, 1700, he recorded 84 head of sheep and goats at Guivave, which is one of his ruins, and there was 40 at Sanavir. Okay, Sanavir mission is not a Kino mission. He started the foundation of it, but it was not his. We know that in the southern portion of the state, the sheep were pretty well wiped out, except for in isolated little places here and there, and that's because of the Apache raids. And they had a really interesting way of moving the sheep. They had a pilero camp. The stronger sheep, and I don't know if they figured out which ones are the stronger, which ones are the weaker, they would tie up together, and they put all of the weaker sheep in, and they would be able to move them. They were able to move them long distances to get away from the cavalry or anybody chasing them. So that kept them. And then when the Pimas and the Apaches do not get along, the Pimas obviously kept that in check. And so then you started to build up the industry. The northern portion of the state then started to see the sheep, besides on the Navajo reservation between 1840 and 1860 because of the military expedition. Think about Beale coming across. And you had others. And they learned from other military guys, bring sheep, don't eat your donkeys because you need them to carry things, but your sheep you can go ahead and kill and you have food. So they learned that. And then the sheep were trailed out of New Mexico into California. They did not stay here at this point in time. Let's think about it, 1849, what was going on? Gold rush in California, and those people needed to eat. And the guys could buy the sheep for like 50 cents and sell them for $16 a head in California. So they could make a lot of profit, even though it took them to move across it and everything. So that was a benefit. That's what a Navajo churro, it's a different type of wool. That's the reason why they make rugs and the blankets out of it. Okay. There is an organization trying to get back to keeping the pure Navajo churro sheep, but that's another story in itself. They usually have at least 2 horns, some of them have 4. If they get 6, that is going to split their skulls, and they don't breed those. Yeah, it's not good to have that many horns. So there was different grazing areas because of a couple things going on. First of all, in the 1850s and moving into the 1860s, you had drought in California. And they remember trailing the sheep across. So they either trailed the sheep across the northern portion, down a little bit, or they moved them out of Texas or out of Mexico, and they moved them across, and they would cross at Yuma. Right? And of course, if they did the southern, they had to worry about the Apaches at this point in time still. Apaches weren't subdued until the really 1890s, and almost into the 1900s. So the northern route was a better route. So they saw, if you think about the grasses up around Flagstaff and things, real good grass areas. And so when they ended up with the drought, they started to bring the sheep in. And the first area they brought the sheep into was the Prescott area. And you had a variety of people that brought them in. Lee was one, Campbell, I don't need to go through all the names, but they realized very quickly, Fain, F-A-I-N, I'm not certain I'm pronouncing that correctly, his wife had sheep, he had cattle and she had sheep, and when they married then they combined the two, and there's some roads up in the Prescott area named for them. But they soon, they had the military, so they were able to sell the meat to the military up in that area. And that was one of the reasons why they were protected, because there was Fort Whipple up there. Also that helped them out. But they soon realized that they needed to move northward. So they moved into the area around Winslow, or Williams and Flagstaff and the San Francisco Peaks area. And you now started to get people like the Daggs that moved in. You've got McMillan who came in, who supposedly brought 200,000 sheep in from Australia. That number is probably very, very high. We know the Daggs had 50,000 sheep at least, but you're starting to see a lot more people up in that area bringing sheep in because they saw the great grazing area. Now, sheep were here actually before cattle, except for the cattle that Father Keno brought in. Okay, so the cattle actually followed the sheep out of California into Arizona, and the sheep were real nice, even though the cattlemen won't admit this. They had the seed that dropped out of their wool that grew the nice grass that the cattle like to eat. So actually they should have had them together, and there's a good reason for having the two of them together. But we start to see that Flagstaff, McMillan's farm, ranch area was where Flagstaff got its name. They set up the flagpole. But that area starts to really grow. You then start to get people that move in over to the Winslow and Holbrook area, and then northward of this. And these are people that came out of Utah and out of New Mexico. So you got the Candelarias, you got the Babbitts that came into this area. I can't remember all the names, there's so many of them. In fact, there was so much wool early on that up on the Navajo Reservation at Tuba City, you had woolen mills here. And they didn't last for very many years because then they would still have to take the wool someplace. And the woolen mills in California at the time could do it a lot cheaper because everybody was shipping their wool there, so it was cheaper. So it didn't last for very long. But they did move into the Winslow-Holbrook area. The third area, obviously, is the White Tanks. The White Mountains, and these are people that came over from New Mexico mainly. You could get people up in the Winslow and Holbrook area that would bring their sheep down. I'm not telling the story about the Pleasant Valley War. That's another story in itself, but that's what part of the problem was, because when the sheep started to come down off of the rim, then there was the cattle war and the sheep war. Between the two, but you did have that. The third area was where they brought them in out of Texas and New Mexico. The Chiricahua Mountains saw a lot of sheep in the winter time. They would bring them out of Texas. Nice grasses and everything there. This is when we obviously had a lot more water than we do today. We didn't have the forest fires because of the sheep. And you had people like Thule, Ochoa, that were freighters, and they also had sheep. They set up over here some big ranches and had the sheep and the cattle both. And then the next area, what happens is they are setting up in the Yuma area. When they finally decided that in the wintertime there was lots of snow, they weren't doing well in the wintertime up here, they would have to bring food and things into them, they decided they needed to move them someplace. Let's move them southward. Shearing stations and everything moved. In the Yuma area is one of the first ones they moved them to, and they would feed on the alfalfa fields and things of that sort. But and then mostly they were fattened up there. Okay, the sheep, especially the lambs, the babies. And then they really started to move into the Salt River Valley, and the Salt River Valley then became a prime area for them in the winter months. It was at a time back in the 1910s, 1920s, where we didn't have the cattle or the dairy farms yet that had moved in, and people had the alfalfa fields. And if it's too wet, you can't cut the alfalfa. You didn't have any place to sell it, so let the sheep come in. And sheep did two things: kept the alfalfa eaten down, which was good for them, and it also put fertilizer, the nitrogen, back out on the soil, which was good, obviously, for them. And this area becomes very, very important, really all the way from Phoenix up into the Wickenburg area. And trails had been developed by this time where they would move their sheep. Up in the Phoenix area, in a place called Cave Creek, you had a gentleman by the name of Houck who came in. He had a great big ranch up in this area, actually where Houck, Arizona is. And he saw, he was a go-getter, and he realized that he could make a lot of money by setting up a shearing station up in Cave Creek. He also then set up a tuberculosis place where people came because of our good weather here. And so he made lots of money on doing that. And so their shearing was needed, obviously. And at one point there was two different times a year that they would shear the sheep. They got more on it if they just waited, and so later on it just became one time, and that pretty much was centered in the Phoenix area. As Phoenix and this area, Maricopa County, grew, they had to start moving southward, and that's the reason why the last three families are in the Casa Grande area today. Okay, so that's the connection to the Alzas, the Manarolas, and they're all related to each other one way or the other. I mean, they're either a sister married into the other family or whatever, or they're aunts and uncles of each other, because the Basque are very close-knit group of people. So those are our areas. These are some of the families that were involved at one time or are still. This is the Alza family, so this is Carmen, who you met. This is them crossing the river, which they won't be doing this year. Some of the older pictures I put in before they sold their sheep. The picture over in the corner over here is Bass Aha, that you would remember. The Manarolas is the one with the horse there. And ladies did have sheep. There are a couple companies that were run by women. And the Manarolas, their oldest daughter, when he passed away, the dad passed away, she took on with her mom. And her mom lived to be 101 years old. Died in 2014, somewhere right around there, 2015. And the daughter ran the operation. She has just passed away herself, and now it's the youngest son that is running it. So what I'm going to do now is talk to you on the yearly cycle. And this is going to take you on the trail where you have taken out pizza and things to the men. They've crossed your ranch, all right? And we're going to start up here in May. We're in May, so this is a good place to start. This is when they would walk the driveways. In the beginning, when they were up at the Phoenix area, they would take them from Phoenix on different trails and go different directions. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Then they would be on the summer range. This would usually be about 6 weeks that they would be on the trail. In the past, it could have been longer than that. In fact, they would want them longer than that. Eat the grass on the Forest Service land on the way up, because that made the sheep healthier, and it was mainly the females that they did this because they wanted them to get ready to have babies. Summer range, June to October. Sometime during that period of time, they'll do tagging. This is to take the wool out from around the eyes, and they shave the ladies' outer area so that the babies, when they're born, can suckle very easily. They're then trucked back down to their winter range in October to November. Depends on the temperature up in the Flagstaff area and when their permits are over with on the Forest Service land. They then will have their babies. The lambing season is November to February, depends on when the female got pregnant. They really would like them to be in November so they can get them fattened up for the Easter market. The babies. Shearing and docking happens in February. Shearing, of course, they'll shear the total female. At that point in time, docking is taking their tails off now, or at least cutting it. And the reason for that is if they don't, as they go to the bathroom, that collects on the wool on the tail, and it's not healthy for the sheep. So there's a reason for doing that. Then the lambs go off the market, and then we start the process all over. So I'm going to take you on some of the trail. In the past, the Bass, being Catholic, would have the priest come out, and he would bless them before they went on the trail, and then he would bless them again for having good lambs. And you want to have a lamb or a ewe that has 2 babies. I'll talk about that in a minute. So here are the driveways that have been used. There's more. There was 66 at one time in the state of Arizona. This is the Beaver Reno. It's the longest and most difficult trail. It lasts about 60 days. This is the one that cuts through your area. This is the Mud Tanks Government Gap. We go up the Winslow area and then up towards the Indian Reservation. This is the one that follows the freeway. It used to belong to the Wool Growers Association, and then some government entity said, no, a private agency can't have a trail, so they had to sell the land, and that was what was made I-17. And then they go off so that they go over towards the Williams area. There's other trails that lead out. I just put on some of the most common ones. This is one of the markers. The guys know that they have to stay in a certain area, and they have to move the sheep so far on a daily basis. It's usually 3 miles. It's not as restricted today, but when you think about when we had 300,000 sheep moving from the northern area to the southern area, they had to keep the sheep moving. So 3 days. And you wanted to be one of the first outfits because you had the better grass. You don't want to be the last outfit because the grass may not be as good, and you're all in that same area, and the trail could be as wide as 5 miles, or it could be only 1 mile wide. So the guys, once the sheep has been on it, the sheep pretty much know where they're going, and the babies just sort of follow along. So it doesn't take much. These herders have been doing this for a long period of time. They work for the same family. And I'll come back and talk about them in a minute. One of the old markers, and you can see this is a Forest Service map of showing some of the other trails. Some of the ones that were proposed are in the yellow, but you can't see this very well because it's been out there for a long period of time. But it did say boundary for the stock driveway, and that could be that they would take the cattle on it also. These trails are actually old Indian trails that were already established, or by the wildlife themselves, the bighorn sheep or whatever. The Beaver Ruin, now I'm going to just talk about that for just a moment. You can see it would go through the Mesa area, and Mr. Dobson, Dwayne Dobson, was the last to use it in 2011. For going the whole way, he would take his sheep. And it's called the Beaver Reno. The Reno portion of the trail is because there was the old Fort Reno, which lasted about 6 months. And just other people that were in this area, but there were certain places that 3 or 4 days he couldn't get into his sheep. So the herders and the sheep were out there on their own. And that'll come important in a moment when we talk about the trail that I've been on with them. He got out in 2011 because of moving through the city. Even though we have the laws that say the sheep and the cattle and everything have the right of way, that didn't stop people from just mowing through them and killing some of the sheep. And he just got tired of it. People enjoy watching them cross the river and things, but unfortunately that wasn't being done. Here's him taking his sheep on the Salt River. As you notice, the water's not very high. They're not even up very high on their little legs. The sheep will go across very easily. In those cases, they don't like water particularly though. But other cases where the water could be quite high, what happens is they have to build bridges. And in 1941-42, we had World War II, and all military uniforms were made out of wool. And wool, the meat was shipped to the guys to eat. So they needed the sheep, and so they got everything that they pretty well needed. because to build anything, you had to go to the War Department to ask permission to get wood. You just didn't go down to Home Depot or Ace or whatever and buy wood. You had to ask for them. Now, a lot of the material came from abandoned mines up in the area. This is on the Verity River up north of Cave Creek. You can get from Bloody Basin or go up that direction to get to it. The bridge today is gone. This old one, there is a bridge there, but that one is not there. Frank Alza was a sheep herder. He is Basque. It's the Alza family that you talked to. So it would have been her father-in-law. And the river at times could be as just below the bridge. Try to swim up the sheep across. So that's the reason why they needed it. On the one side, they would shear the sheep. So this is where they would bring some of the sheep in the winter time. And then there was the trail. But it was very important. They wanted people to raise sheep. Join a sheep club to all the kids. So, you know, our 4-H and their FFA program, which we still have kids doing, but 20 sheep to equip one soldier. Because even his undies. Yeah. But, you know, people say, oh, that had to be scratchy. But I think that certain wool is not scratchy. Depends on how they do it and what the wool is. Merino is a really nice, fine wool. And if you ever done any weaving or crocheting with any of that kind of stuff, it's nice. And if you get some of it that still has some of the lanolin in it, it's nice on your hands. Just another picture of the bridge back in 1946. This is a family that came forward after the book was written. She had bought the book and said, oh, my name's on it here. Why don't you have anything about my family? They know about you. They were in business for 7 years. So a lot of those type of people, unfortunately, got through the cracks, but she's out with her family as they were crossing the bridge. Wool bags, you know, where you had to, in these days, back in the 1940s, 50s, they put the bag and then they put wool in it, and you'd stomp on it, and then, you know, they put more wool and you stomp on it. Now they don't do it that way. But the little kids all had to do that, and I understand that you did that for a while, as you were telling me, back in... This is the Blue Point Sheep Bridge, another bridge that they needed. It finally collapsed with a flooding and everything. The Sheep Bridge, the reason why they had to take it down and build a new one, even though they had declared it as a historical monument here in Arizona, it was made out of the wood, and the people camping in the area was taking the wood from the bridge and used for their campfires. So one of the girls from the Alza family fell, one of the grandchildren fell through the bridge one day. So it was at that point in time they decided they needed to do something. So they built one that they can't do that with. The bridges were points also, and this is this is a Blue Cross bridge. There was a point where the ranger could count how many sheep were going to be on the Forest Service land because they pay for the use of the land for the summer per sheep. So it can be pretty expensive for these people, and so that's what he's doing. So what they do, did he fall asleep?
So great.
You can see where they funnel along so that it makes it easy. But the guys, I mean, they can. I haven't seen one fall asleep yet. But they sort of stand over there. Maybe they are. Check that out the next time I know how to do this. This is a crossing in the Bush Highway. You notice that the road wasn't paved, so this is a long time ago. And then it doesn't have any cars or anything, but this is the Echemende family that back in the 1940s and 50s, traffic would stop, but people would come out and watch the sheep cross the bridge and things. But they didn't want them cutting across their land, they didn't want them cutting across their grass and chomping out the grass or the flowers or anything like that, but that was okay at the river. But the rivers became a central point for the business. I'll come back to that point in a minute. This is the Black Canyon Freeway, obviously, and it's where we have pretty much found the trail through Black Canyon. They have gone out and looked. Now it's a recreational area, and this the actual sheep trail doesn't follow all on one side. It does meander back and forth. And they have underpasses and stuff, but it's a little farther north, because this is obviously south of you folks. So we're now on the trail, okay? So they stop during the middle of the day when it's hot. The sheep all lie down and eat. And, the donkeys are unloaded at this point in time, so that and then they're hobbled together so that their front feet, so that they don't wander very far away, but they can obviously eat. That is all the supplies for the guys for maybe 2 or 3 days. Could be a little longer in the past, but their food, their toilet paper, everything is there. The sheep, let's see if this looks going to work. They're going under the underpass. This is on the road to Cottonwood. So you got about 2,000 sheep right here. You've got 3 guys with the sheep. And of course this is the riverbed, but they're allowed to use that, so they are very careful. This is the Great Pyrenees dog, which is the reason I left this one on. The Great Pyrenees dogs is the protector dog. He doesn't really move the sheep or anything, they sort of follow along with him. But you notice he sort of looks like one of them. He's about the same height as them. And so he'll just lay down among the sheep. And if somebody's out there that's not supposed to be, he's going to bark, he's going to get up. When I go out now, they just sort of look at me as if, oh, it's you again. Especially when I have my camera, or they'll come over and they want petted. I found out I was supposed to be taking treats to them. I didn't know that. So next time I go out, I have to take treats. That's what they're really looking for when they get people coming up. So then they're go up and of course they stop. They will take and snack along the way, until the little collie dogs will keep pushing them along. And what we're doing is we're getting ready to cross the Verde River, which they're not doing this year because of the water situation. But it's a time for the families to get together with friends and other family members that will come in, and they have a great big picnic. And it's always the matriarch, so it would have been Manarola who would have set this all up. It's now Carmen that sets it up. You've got Joe, Alza. These are the 3 herds I went along with. A friend, he's given them new hats. This is where they're getting their supplies, and it's taken down. Everybody either helps carry down, or they'll bring a donkey up to help them with this. But the guys then get another meal that is different than what they would normally have out on the trail. Usually the chicken instead of the mutton that they're going to be eating. But it's a couple hours, because this is their break time. This is when the sheep are laying down along the river. There's usually one guy that is down along the river watching the sheep, because we get a lot of people coming to want to watch this and take pictures. It is actually a very fun time. There are boxes that are carried on. The donkeys have to have everything in: medicine, part of their food, any personal items or anything else are carried in those pack boxes. This is Fermin Echeria, who was a Basque long time ago. The tent and everything else, when he was a herder before he ended up having his own herd of sheep. A lot of them, that's what they started out with. So the Alza's dad, when he came, he was a herder, and then he got his own sheep. The Manarolas was the same way. So they all started out usually, they didn't come in, buy sheep, because they didn't have the money. Some of the stories that they have told me coming across where they had no money. And on the ship, they packed their own food, and hopefully it would last long enough until they got into the United States, because they had very, very little money. The boxes that are used for their tables. This is John Aldiman. And now we're getting ready, we're going to cross the river. So they got the donkeys all loaded up. The first guy will start out and herd the donkeys across. The dog realizes what's going on, so he's up and getting the sheep moved, obviously. And now we're going to start across the river. Notice the guys are downriver. You do, as you get the sheep going across, they do get rambunctious and they can knock one of their over. As you can notice, this guy's going the other way. He noticed that they were going across the water, so he said, I'm not doing that. And they all start going the other way. That's the reason why you have to have lots of people out to keep moving them across. It's the only time that they really have to do that. I think this is a little video. Yeah. Oh, cool. And you can see that one of them did, so they got to get him out of the water. Now they've been shaved or sheared in February, so they don't have a lot of wool on in May. So, and the water's a little deeper here than that first picture. So you can see where they're trying to get up on top. What's going on in front? And then they go, oh, I don't think I like that. So.
That one goes the other direction. Oh my.
Something how they all get together and go like that.
Yeah.
Instead of just...
Some years it's real easy to get them to go across, some years it's not. I, last year, decided I was going to be on the other side of the river and get pictures of them coming right towards me, which was, they didn't want to go that year anyway across the river. The donkeys didn't even want to go across the river. And I was trying to hold on to one of the donkeys to come across, and I thought maybe that was the reason why, so they just helped me across, and the donkeys still didn't want to go across. But I stood right where they come. And I think that they were, one, unhappy that I was standing there, and two, because they didn't want to be in the water, they all got out and they shook all over me. And I was sopping wet. But it was a hot day, so it was sort of nice.
Yeah, that water looks right.
So they're out up in their summer grazing area, the Williams Flagstaff area. The herder will be with them 24/7. He now has a nice little house he stays in. It's a trailer. Come on. This is after they have tagged them, actually out of order a little bit, that picture. The herder out there with them. And that's one of the collie dogs. There's usually 3 to 5 collie dogs, depending on how many sheep he has that's under his control. And they'll just bite their little legs to get them to move. They're not really protected dogs. They may run off with the Pyrenees if there's somebody that comes along or there's a coyote or something. But pretty much they stay with the sheep all the time. One of the old sheep camps, the Pukats, so you can see the old car, the tent that the guys would sleep in, the fires. Just the Great Pyrenees coming over, he wants me to pet him. I think he wanted food, but I didn't know that. The Basque are also known for doing the tree carvings. We call them a living outdoor museum, and again, it's only in the western portion of the United States. Archaeologists call them culturally modified trees. Problem is they don't last very long because of the forest fires, people chopping them down, vandalism, etc. So you have that. Here's some of them. This is taken from the Bass Library. The ones I have aren't as good as this, so I just went. They're usually about women. Remember, the guys are out there 24/7. They don't see their families. They're Peruvian herders today, and they get to go home once every 3 years. So they have a family at home, but they make more money here. That's one of the reasons why they do come. So I'm getting ready to tag. So they built these areas. The shearers inside, they don't know what they're doing, and then they need to poke them to get them inside so that they can be sheared. Obviously, these are all females that should be pregnant. So they've done up around the face, as you can see now, and then they're doing the other areas. The males will be totally sheared at this point in time, the rams, because there's no reason not to. So one of the rams being totally sheared. They're counting the sheep at this point in time. The shearers need to be paid, but this is also a time to make sure that the sheep owner knows how many sheep are there. The guys are allowed to kill so many for their food, obviously, but did one wander off and nobody caught it. There was one that did get left last year, and somebody found it and just took it in, and they knew it had to belong to 1 or 2 families up in the Flagstaff area. They called them, they said, yeah, it won't be able to come back into the herd now, so they just left it with them. But that's very unusual that happens. One on the ram decided he wanted to stay with the female, so they do lasso sheep also. This is a paint that they will put on, so the M for the Manarola. And one of the old, was the Espiel. And this is the way they do those bags of the wool today. The movement to winter grazing. They even have to take dogs, obviously. The sheeper really knows the sheep, right? And so he knows when there is a new mom who doesn't know what she's supposed to be doing. And the little baby obviously doesn't know it's supposed to go over to mom and suckle, so he takes the two of them and puts them together. So that's what he's doing. And then mom knows, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. She only had one. The herder likes them to have two because that is more profit. And they really hope for three, which are known as leppies, which means she can't feed the third one and they have to be bottle fed. So they're now at their winter grazing area. They get hobbled together. If there's twins, what I do with it? I'll pass this around. The weaker one gets pulled along by the stronger one, and make sure that they all go to get milk from mom. So that's what's happening in the one picture. Of course, then she's feeding her to. He's out there. His hook is to get babies away that don't belong to that mom and back over to the mom they belong to. Because they'll just go and eat off of anybody. Here's feeding a leppy. And one year, Frank Aramussi, daughters had to feed 80. That's their job. And he said they were in the kitchen, they were every place, but they had to bottle feed 4 times a day. So, and that was the responsibility of his little girls, he said. Spring shearing, similar to the tagging, obviously. They measure the wool. They want to know how much, how long it is and how dirty it is. The dirtier the wool, the less it's worth. If it's not very long, it's not worth as much. So you got the spills, and then this is an old picture, obviously. The guy finding out what he's going to pay them. So why do we only have so many sheep here in the United States? Well, there is the government bureaucracy. We have a problem bringing in labor. They can only come in for 3 years. They have to leave for a period of time, and then they are, if they want to come back, they start the paperwork before they even leave, so that when their time period's up back in their own country, and it's usually Peru today, at least for here in Arizona, there could be some from Mexico, but most of them have been here 15, 20 years with the same families. They get to know each other, they know what is expected. The owner of the sheep knows that, these are good guys, they've been training, working with my sheep well. Government agencies, there's the Endangered Species Act that they have to follow. The bighorn sheep was part of the reason why the Heber-Reno Trail had to be given up. The bighorn sheep are, as you know, big up in that area, not as much over in the Black Canyon. And there was talk that the domesticated sheep was killing off with a disease. They found out that it was actually deer that was giving the bighorn sheep the disease. But they went in and said, no, you can only run so many sheep on the trail. And if you can only run so many sheep, then that means then it's going to be more expensive for you to have to truck them. At one point in time when they first started to bring the sheep down from the northern portion of the state, they were able to bring them on rail cars. But in 1970, the railroad wouldn't do it anymore. They didn't handle them very well. They didn't pay the people if they lost the sheep through death because they didn't stop and do what they were supposed to do. So you had that. Grazing water rights this year. No trailing because of the fact that they can't put the sheep on the Forest Service land. There's no water for them. They would have to bring that water in the driveways. There's really only one that's real active, and that's the Black Canyon, and then the one that heads over to the Williams area, and that's because they have a 10-year contract on that, and then it has to be renewed. And what the Forest Service is going to do on 2021, I think as the Black Canyon one is up, Who knows? And so they may have to spend the money and truck. Most of them have bought their own trucks now because of that. And family members have gotten the commercial driver's license so that they can be the drivers for the truck. Predators. It used to be that you were allowed to go out and kill the coyotes, to shoot them, put poison out, marking the area. You're not allowed to do that. And one of the big problems on the Beaver Reno was when they introduced the Mexican wolf back into the wild, they dropped them right in the area of the sheep, not telling them, and they lost a lot of sheep. So you got that. And I mean, I'm not for not having the animals and things, the wild animals, but, you know, let's face it, we've got food problems in this country, and we've got to do something about that. Importation of foreign lamb and wool is a big, big problem here in the United States. If you go to the grocery store and you want lamb, you're going to find that it's mostly from New Zealand and Australia. China has the most sheep in the world today. Fry's does carry American lamb, and yeah, it's more expensive than the others, but it's one of the most healthy meats for you because the omega oils in it. So that is like, it's something like 5-7 times what beef is. So that, and then there's no source of food for the sheep in the valleys anymore because of the dairies, and we went through that subdivision, so I want them to go through. Come on, only a couple more. So the future, we do have a wool processing plant here. It's the Mystic Pines fiber processing up in the Williams area. You have the sheep dairy over just south of Wickenburg. They sell all their milk to California, $40 a gallon. But remember, they only lactate for so long, so that's part of the problem. And you can store sheep milk for a year because they freeze it. And then ship frozen. Education, there is a program called Make It With Wool Fashion Show that goes out to schools trying to get kids to go back and make wool clothes. The Flagstaff Fiber and Wool Festival, which is coming up in June. Wool garments for the military, they are starting to go back. They're making right now socks and hats. They are getting groups of women to make the hats for them to wear under their helmets because it is fire retardant, so it's real good for that. We're trying to get back to maybe even more of the uniform. Teaching shearing and sheep husbandry to a younger generation. Women are really getting into learning how to shear. And of course they don't use the old hand shears, it's electric. And there are schools over in California for that, also through the FFA and the 4-H. And then support new sheep ranchers. Anyone who wants to come in, there's a gentleman who would like to have more sheep. He's got 25 right now. But the cost, sheep costs $300, $350. So to add to his, the only way he's adding is if he has babies. And of course, if you have a lamb or a ewe that has twins in the past, you want them to have twins in the future. So you do keep those ewes. And with that, I'm just going to see if I can get this to run, and I'll leave that, and I'll answer any questions I have for you. As you can see, I'm on this side, this time taking the picture. The little dog, he thinks he needs to push him across. And notice here, he's not hitting the dog. He just splashing him to make him move out of the way. They don't even hit the sheep. Somebody, when they saw this one day, said, they're hitting the sheep. No, they're not. They're hitting the water and splashing the water up on them. Remember, this is their livelihood. And the herders know that if the sheep industry disappears, they're going to lose a job. They're going to go back to their own country. They make, right now I think it's about $1,400 per month to live here and do this. Now they're out with the sheep 24/7, obviously, for those 3 years. But $1,400 when from Peru they may make $2,000, $3,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Most of that they don't have any place to spend it, so it goes back home to help out their families. And what was nice about this group of herders that I have followed, they were from Cajamarca, Peru, and I spent a lot of time as an archaeologist in their town, so we had a lot of things to talk about. So I think that's the reason why I was able to follow and get so much information. And when I did stupid things, they just laughed at me and, all right, we got to help her cross the river. Because I'm holding my camera, that's more important. I don't care if they fall.
Could you speak their language?
No, I do not speak fluent Spanish.
Yeah, but you point and laugh a lot.
Yeah. And you know what? When I first went out with them, we drew pictures on the ground. It worked. And I know this guy, he's the one in the back with the red pants on. These are his two sons. So it was a family operation up here, which made it real nice. And I know the word for son and daughter, so I could ask him questions like that, and I could ask him where he was from. That's the reason why, America! I was really excited about that. You can see that they're coming, they're not supposed to be coming this direction, and the little dogs are not doing their duty. They're supposed to keep them in line. And that's how I got so wet.
This herd here, this large herd, is this the one that comes through Cordes? I was led to believe that they weren't running that big a herd through there.
The 2,000 sheep are allowed. They could run more, but this year they're not allowed to run any. Now there are some sheep in different places around in this area until they're able to get one.
They ran through there last year?
Yeah, they went across the river last year. Yeah. And so
So they truck them into, not Blood Basin, but the other one. Further south, the next
I can't think of where it is. No, not Cordis. Cordis would be
Badger
north of
Springs.
Badger Springs, yeah,
They
thank
truck
you.
them into there.
There, right.
But this many, wow.
Well, remember, they're bringing them all up to Flagstaff on the truck, so if they can take a herd and take it so that they're keeping the old method alive, that's what they're going to do.
Well, they truck most of them up, huh?
The Rams never walk the trail.
Oh.
The men get it easy.
Yeah.
Well, they want to make the females want more.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that they want to keep that
Trail going.
plus the historical perspective, because in the east they have smaller herds and they just move them from little pastures here and there. They may have some people that have cows and they can bring them over because the cows and the sheep don't eat the same food in most cases, so you have that. But they do not trail them. There is one other place where they do a lot of trailing, and that's in Idaho, and this gentleman has 600 miles and he takes the sheep continuously. And he does this, goes up and then comes back down to the south. Goes back up, and he shears along the way. He's got all the Forest Service land and everything all set up so that he can do that. And one of the things I wanted to point out, which I forgot to do, we are seeing more and more forest fires in the western states because of the fact there's less sheep, and the sheep kept the undergrowth down, which we always said that instead of the Forest Service being paid by the sheep owners, they should be paying the sheep people to bring the sheep to keep that grass down. Because that would eliminate, and if a sheep herder is out there and there is a fire started, they'll go over and stop it because they don't want to have no land for their sheep. So there's that. So,
You didn't mention the sheep dipping. Do they still dip?
no, they give them and they do that during tagging, that they will give them their medicine and everything for that. Yeah, they don't
They
need
used
it.
to do that at the bridge, sheep crossing.
Right, and then they also did the dipping at Cordis, and because they ran the one year, they did run the sheep through there, and she had a great big festival and everything there. That she is now sick and not able to do any of that, so that was one of the reasons why they have
What was
stopped.
the name of the people at Cordes?
Cordis, their last name was
Old
Cordis.
man?
Henry or Harry.
Cordes.
Yeah, it was Harry Cordis. It was Harry or Henry Cordis. I don't remember.
Okay,
It starts with an H.
because we were fortunate, they had a big sheep thing down in Black Canyon City here
Back
about
in
5 years ago.
about 5-6 years ago, yes.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, and and the Azas were part of that, the Manarolas were part of that, yeah.
And they serve mutton stew.
Mhm.
I don't see any here.
I was going to bring some of the cheese for you. I'm going to leave it at that. Help out a American sheep owner eat American lamb. It's totally different taste to it than what you're going to get in Australia and New Zealand. And when we went to Australia and New Zealand, we certainly noticed the difference. It's partly is the way they cook it and stuff too. But I thank you.
Thank you.
But you want to make sure that you're supporting the American industry. We used to have 55 million sheep in the United States. We're down to 5 million.
Oh.
At the sheep growers conference in February, it's up to 5.2
In the whole United States?
in the whole United States. They even have sheep in Alaska. So in every state they have sheep. There's Wool Growers Association that helps out. Something I didn't talk about. If it wasn't for the Wool Growers Association being established back in the late 1800s, 1896, there really would have been no sheep industry in the state of Arizona. When the forest reserves came in, they wanted to eliminate the sheep totally because the cowboys had more pull, more political pull with the Babbitts and others, that they wanted to eliminate, saying that no, they were doing all the damage. It wasn't the cows. And E.S. Gosney, who was the one president, said, you need to come out and not believe armchair scientists who are sitting someplace and never seen what's going on here. And he got Pinochet, who was the first forester, to come to Arizona and notice, and that's how come when the reserves were set up that they were allowed to keep their trails and have the right to be in the forest in the summer times. So, yeah, there's a lot with this. So,
Didn't the government try to get rid of the churros at one point too?
they did. They went in, and because there was too many churros on the Indian reservation, but unfortunately the Bureau of Indian Affairs did not understand that the sheep belonged to the females, and that was their livelihood. So they would go in and they just wiped out family sheep. I mean, I don't know how many millions of sheep that they just went in and slaughtered. And sometimes right in front of the family, they would just shoot them and dump them in a ditch. Today, the Bureau of Indian Affairs only allows you to have 35 sheep per family. So if a mother and a daughter are doing it, they're still only allowed to have 35 sheep, which is another interesting thing if you've never been to. Of course, it's the Flagstaff Fiber and Wool Festival. I'll be doing a talk up there, but not this one. I'm going to talk about every part of the sheep is used except for the bah. Got that down pat now.
That was good.
I was afraid about that. And then the other thing is the Sheep is Life that's up on the Navajo, which is 2 weeks later. To go to, and they teach weaving classes and a variety of things up there. You'll get to know more about the sheep. They bring them in and show them the people and things like that. So, excellent.
Now you have your book available.
I do have my book available, yes, and I will sign it. So, again, I thank you. I don't know if I went over on my time or
You're
not.
fine.
That's
You're
fine.
fine.
I think I asked you and then you didn't reply back. So if you're okay, when I get tired, I'll just start leaving. Or you'll fall asleep. See, that's the reason I didn't play that any longer.
Thank you. Let's give her another round.
And if you're familiar with the Range magazine, I updated a story from my book. See if I can find it here real quick. That it's called The Survivors. It's about the Manarola family. And it's in the newest one that's going to be coming out. They sent it ahead of time to me, thank goodness, so I can show it today. So if you, I don't know if you've read it. In fact, there's a couple articles about sheep in this one. So she's trying to do more. CJ Hadley, who's the editor, is trying to do more on the sheep industry because she realizes that.